Welcome to the Everyday GSD podcast. We're going to try this again, Jeff. We have special guest today, Jeff Mann. Jeff's a very unique individual. I've got so many acronyms and so many cool little letters and words in here, alphabet companies you've worked for, and you've done a lot of cool shit, but you are a speaker. You're, I'll say a hacker. There's probably a different word to use, but we're going to talk about hacking later. Yep. You've worked for, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but you worked for the NSA for 10 years. You live currently in Maryland. You also co-host, which we'll make sure we put on our screen, Paul's Security Weekly, which is a podcast.
Yep.
And who do you co-host that with?
Oddly enough, a guy named Paul Asadorian.
Okay, Paul Asadorian. Shout out to Paul. Paul, you're not here, but I'm confident Jeff is going to do your guys' podcast good on this podcast. So obviously we are here at the Special Forces Association convention, and you are one of the very important speakers. So thank you for taking time to come onto the show. As you know, the show is about everyday GSD, people who get shit done, like-minded individuals who get shit done. Mm-hmm. And again, I do have a bunch of stuff. I might read some more stuff on here if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Tribe of Hackers. What's TOH?
Tribe of Hackers.
Yeah. Tribe of Hackers. Says it right here in front of
me. Four different editions.
Yeah, red team, security leaders, blue team, and currently serving in consulting advisory role in the online business system. You have more than 40 years experience working in all these aspects of computer, networking, information security, including cryptography, risk management, vulnerability analysis, compliance assessment. It just goes on and on. Basically, you're an extremely intelligent human, and you're going to share some cool shit with me today. And hopefully when people are all done listening to this episode, they're going to be motivated to go get shit done or protect themselves to make sure they can continue to get shit done. How's that sound?
Sounds like a good goal.
Yes. So
let's GSD.
Let's GSD, baby. So thank you. Toast to you.
Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers, fellas.
Yes. And thank you.
And to all you out there, cheers.
Yeah,
that's your Ed McMahon over there.
Be sure to tip your bartender.
Yes.
I don't think she heard me.
Tip the bartender, people. Tip the bartender. She works off of cash, lots of it. Please give her more. He's like, it's a guy. That's not. Okay. Jeff, why don't we just back it up? So I talked to you earlier, and I was excited to have you on the show when this was coordinated with your schedule and our schedule. Mm-hmm. Here we are on location. I think of the word hacker or the term hacker as a relative new term when you say, oh, my computer was hacked or these young kids are hacking. But you've been doing this shit for 40 years.
Yeah, so hacking, or the term hacker, is a word that media has taken and appropriated, if you will, over the years. So most people, when they hear hacker, they have a negative connotation to it. Its original term, which I think goes back to the 70s, the first time it was ever used was to describe computer programmers that just figured out how to GSD in terms of computer code. It was certainly, became a popular term in terms of computer hacking. And when I first started doing it back in the early 90s, it was when the internet was becoming a thing and was becoming publicly accessible. So computer hacking, network hacking, internet hacking was a thing. But it's only been in the last couple of years where I've really, been introspective and tried to understand the term, and looking back on my entire life, I'm like, I've always been a hacker, and the way I define hacker is somebody that's curious, somebody that sees a problem and tries to come up with a solution, wants to understand how things work, doesn't accept the status quo. You can't do that, or you only have to do it this way. There's only one way to do it. I'm always looking for an angle. I'm always looking for a way to improve. And I think as we talk about it today, that it's going to resonate with your audience in terms of everyday GSD. I kind of look at everything I approach as a puzzle.
Okay.
And there's a solution. There's a way to solve it, and there might be more than one solution. There might be a better or worse way to do things, but I'm always looking for the optimal way to GSD,
right,
in whatever I'm doing, whether it's professionally or projects or hobbies on the side type of thing. But so to me, a hacker is just somebody that's curious and wants to solve a problem.
And so when you say that, and thank you for articulating that, because I think a lot of people think of a hacker, it's like my bank account got hacked or my Facebook account got hacked. And of course that is hacking, but you're doing it at a different level, and there's so many other levels of that with the government, let's say looking at the other governments out there trying to figure out what's going on. I don't like to use the word spying, but maybe that's the correct word.
That's what we used to call it.
Yeah, okay. That's what we used to call it.
Espionage, spying, counterintelligence.
Yeah. So let's back it up a little bit, because I feel like we can unpack a lot of stuff here, Jeff. And so what got you into this? You're a 15-year-old kid, you had an Atari 1200 XL, and you decided to take it apart?
No, not. I didn't really go that route, and I grew up in a family that literally liked to do puzzles. Family vacations always revolved around a magazine that was published by a company called Dell. I don't even know if they're still around anymore, but they published a monthly crossword puzzle magazine book that had all sorts of different types of puzzles in it. And my brothers and I'm the youngest of 4 boys, and my dad, who was a physicist, we all took turns doing all the different puzzles, and we all had our favorites.
So your dad's pretty smart.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He's no longer with us, but he was. Yeah, that's a whole different.
Okay.
Whole different topic. We're not going to go there. Drink. Dumbest smart guy I ever met.
What were you going to say, Justin?
I was gonna, but then I'm like, no, I'm not.
Let's not go there. This isn't that type of podcast.
We can make it. We can make it whatever we want after the last one.
Where's the couch? No, but I grew up without technology. Before a lot of stuff, I had an older brother that was he was an engineer and loved physics, and followed in my dad's footsteps more than any of us. And he was always getting the toy of the month. He was the first one to get Pong.
Okay.
That was, I think, the first video game that was available for consumers. Just hitting a ball back and forth on a screen, and it would get faster. Initially, it was really slow, and he was the first one to get a home computer, which it was a kit. He built his first computer. Of course, I grew up building the Crystal radio set, but I wasn't really into that technology aspect of things ultimately. But I did love puzzles, and I loved, in particular, logic problems. So at some level, I think of myself as a logician, and it's a term that I've coined. I don't know if it's a real word or not, but
I like
just trying to figure out what's the best way to do something. Is
that a logical magician?
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, but just I'm the one, and it gets me in trouble a lot. But I'm the one that's the emperor's new clothes, but the emperor's naked, or. There's always got to be a better way to do something. I don't accept that, well, this is the way we've always done it. Why? Well, it's the way we've always done it. Why? So asking questions and trying to figure out a way to do something, not taking no for an answer. If somebody says, well, we've never done it that way, we can't do that, we don't do that, those types of things. Those to me are challenges.
Right.
I don't know if that fits with the GSD mindset or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
But don't tell me I can't do something. Don't tell me why I can't do something. Tell me what needs to be done, and
every problem
just
has
let
a
me
solution.
Go. And sometimes more than one.
Correct.
So that's really, what I was doing at a young age. It was, my earliest memories are, watching the movie War Games, which came out in the early 80s, which was really how computer hacking was done back in those days. It was over a phone line and using modems and very slow connections. And of course, there wasn't streaming video back then. There wasn't a lot of stuff available, but it was mostly just computers had modems connected to them. That's how you accessed them. That's how you accessed the internet, and so you could just randomly dial different phone numbers until you found that computer that was answering on the other end. If you're old enough, you might remember those noises, the AOL connection, that type of thing. But I remember being a kid, we were one of the few first families on our block to get push-button telephones. And I got a book at some point that was like a music book where you could play songs with the tones. But they always cautioned you, is like, make sure you like dial the operator or dial, it used to be you could call up and get time.
Yeah.
And there was a number for time, there was a number for the weather, and they're like, do that first.
I still know those numbers.
If you play the song Oh Susanna that's in the songbook, you're going to end up long distance calling Alaska, and back in those days you got charged incredible amounts of money for long distance phone calling. So a lot of the first hacking was actually called phone phreaking, which was stealing long distance or figuring out how to defeat the phone company so you wouldn't have to pay for your phone calls and your long distance. And I remember we had a phone repairman over one time when I was a little kid, and I looked over his shoulder when he dialed a number and then hung up the phone, and then a few seconds later the phone rang, and that's how he tested the line to see if it was working. And like, I happened to memorize the number. Yeah. So that was like a party trick. I was like, hey, I can make this phone ring. And I did that for years. Dialed a certain number, you heard a tone, you hung up, and then a second later the phone would ring. So that was kind of the first thing I did. I didn't, that didn't get me anything. It was just a cool party trick.
Yeah.
But, and then when I was in college, the thing was stealing cable and trying to demodulate the signals, because if you didn't pay for your premium channels, it would be all garbled and scrambled. But it wasn't really that complicated, and I didn't really ever figure out how to do it because I wasn't that technology minded. But it was pretty simple the way that they were splitting up the audio and the video signal, and it was once you knew how to do it, I knew people. There's a guy down the hall in my dorm that figured out how to put the thing together, so we all had HBO for the whole semester in our dorm type of thing. That was my experience in the early 80s. I went to work at NSA because my mom suggested that I apply. I'd never heard of NSA. I grew up in Maryland, and NSA is based in Maryland, but it was very clandestine back in the day.
Yeah.
And
for those people who, I guess, live under a rock, it's the National Security Agency.
And for those that work there, we don't say it's just NSA.
NSA.
So that's a deep secret that I'm sharing with you. But it's always a good, people that know NSA and people that know the NSA. It's
okay.
We just refer to it as
good
NSA.
Tip.
And we're the agency where that other three-letter agency is the company.
Yeah.
And we don't have any rivalries or anything like that. But I filled out an application, I submitted it, and I was invited.
And how old are you about at this time?
This is right out of college, so I was 20,
21, 22.
Yeah, 22, 23. Yeah. I worked for a year or two out of college, and I actually worked for a year before I went to college. So I graduated college in 85, and I was 23. So this is 23, 24 years old. I'm applying to NSA. I was invited to Fort Meade for a couple days of aptitude tests, a physical examination, a psychological examination, a polygraph, lifestyle study, all sorts of different stuff. And I passed muster, so they offered me a job. And then I went to work for NSA. The first thing I did at NSA was work in an organization called the Manual Crypto Systems Branch, which is where I'm connected to Special Forces. They became my customer very early on, and I helped them with some of the crypto systems, their secure communication systems that they were using. I did a couple more things for a couple years.
And you created?
I created... Where's the camera?
Yeah, you can.
This is the wooden reproduction. This is actually the prototype that was built by the NSA machine shop, because back in those days, NSA built little black boxes where messages, what we called plain text, would go in, and cipher or code would come out. So I was working with Special Forces, and long story short, they use, it's hard to do without visual aids, and if people don't know what it's talking about, but this is essentially a way to do encryption with what's called a one-time pad. And I came up with this originally just for my purposes, just to help me out, because this is really a representation of what's called a trigraph, three-letter groups that are very unique that they use to do their communications. And they would memorize them, and I didn't. So this was just a little cheat for me, but they liked it so much we ended up making like 15,000 of them and distributing it to all the teams in all the special forces groups. And they used it for about 10 years. So that's why I'm here, essentially, is because of what they called the whiz wheel. And there's the wooden reproduction that you can order online on Amazon and Etsy. It's built by a company called Creative Craft House, a guy in Florida, I think, that makes wooden replicas.
A friend of yours or no?
No, don't know him. Somebody approached me a couple years ago at a conference and asked me, hey, have you ever heard of this Special Forces Diana crypto system? And I'm like, well, I vaguely remember it, and I Googled it, and this is what I found. I'm like, I made that. That's my design.
I love it.
So I got in touch with the guy, and he sent me a couple copies.
Yeah, that's
of it.
awesome.
I promote him as much as I can.
Yeah. And what was his name again?
I have no idea what his name is, but,
company?
the company is called Creative Craft House. But
Okay, Creative Craft House. If you're looking for a whiz wheel.
If you're looking for a whiz wheel, or what they call the Diana crypto system, Special Forces Diana, which is a Greek goddess crypto system, you'll find a way to order one of these.
I'm assuming if I order on Amazon, that means they're not using it anymore.
That is correct. Yeah, it is a piece of history.
That is correct.
So I worked in this one office, which was manual crypto systems, for a couple years. Then I went off to the operations side of the house, which is what most people know NSA for, which is basically intercepting communications traffic of all different types, any kind of signals, and figuring out what it says, very often using cryptography. And I did that for a couple years, and then I came back to what was considered the defensive side of the house, what was called InfoSec, or Information Security at the time. And I went to work for an organization that was doing evaluations of the systems that we had already designed, but were out fielded is what we called it. And the rationale was, on the operations side, we very often broke communications and broke codes and ciphers because the people didn't use it correctly. And so somebody's like, well, how do we know our people are using our systems correctly? Because we have the best crypto in the world, but if you don't use it correctly, it kind of falls apart. Fielded systems evaluations. And there was a branch of that organization that was focused on what was called at the time networked systems, because the internet existed from the 70s, but it was mostly mainframe computers on universities that were talking to mainframe computers at three-letter agencies doing a lot of top secret research and so on and so forth. Al Gore invented it, by the way, back in the 70s or the 80s. But it wasn't until the early 90s where the first publicly available web browser was published. It was a browser called Mosaic, and that's kind of what changed the world, frankly.
And who created Mosaic?
Mosaic was you're going to stump me. It was an organization called NCSA that put it out, and I don't remember what that stood for. But
no problem.
It was people that were doing developing work and people that were loosely working with the government, and they were trying to come up with a way to facilitate better communication using the internet and be able to provide better ways of communicating graphics and things more than just, the early days of the internet was you'd log into a mainframe and have some very rudimentary database that you could do queries and do searches, kind of like Google today, but very, 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 very rudimentary, based on keyword searches, but the keywords had to be like pre-programmed in. It wasn't like it was reading the text of stored. And it was mostly documents, not graphics, not images, not streaming video and all that kind of stuff. But that's when we started, a small group of us started looking at network systems and movies like, I mentioned War Games already. There was a movie that came out in the early 90s called Sneakers, Robert Redford. And
I remember that movie.
That was that's essentially the movie that built the model for how a lot of red teaming companies operate even to this day. Testing the security of an organization by breaking into it.
And that's what red team means.
That's essentially what red teaming is testing your defenses by trying to break into it. Live fire testing, to use a military term. There's a movie that also came out, Angelina Jolie in one of her early roles, simply called Hackers. And that each of those movies were showing a little bit different aspect, a little different viewpoint of this culture of computer security, breaking into computers, breaking into networks, breaking in, using the internet as the means of breaking into things.
Right.
So all of that, made a small group of us decide we want to learn how to break into computers. We want to learn to, network hacking, internet hacking, and that's what we set out to do. The world was changing, so the management was starting to get wind of, this is becoming a thing. The digital age is kind of exploding, and the monolithic, very bureaucratic NSA defensive organization that built little black boxes in a lot of ways was ill-equipped and slow to pick up the speed to respond to how fast things were happening in the emerging internet age. But we started to figure out how to break into computers and networks, and then try to explain to the victims, as it were, what they needed to do to shore up their defenses, to provide the mitigations and the protections to prevent us. And we're the good guys breaking in. You don't want the bad guys to break in, type of thing. And that's the essence of. We didn't call it red teaming at the time. We just called it penetration testing.
Right. So you're doing this to corporations, or you're doing this to government?
Initially at NSA, we were doing it first to NSA itself. NSA had its own networks. That's kind of where we learned our craft. But then we started doing it to NSA's purview was anything classified. And so any DoD, military, State Department, anything where there was classified communications, where there was networks involved, that was our purview. So that's what we did initially. And we were kind of early adopters, and not everybody was into this stuff. It was very foreign and very weird and very counter culture, if you will, to what NSA was accustomed to doing.
Right.
Somehow the word got out, and we started being asked to do this to other government agencies that weren't necessarily in the classified realm, more of the unclassified public sector type of parts of the government. And that's where the wheels kind of fell off a little bit, because NSA has what's called a charter. It's a classified document to this day that essentially says that NSA can only do what NSA does to foreign nationals, to third parties, nation states, other countries, and very specifically, NSA can't do what NSA does to U.S. citizens. And of course, we were doing ethical hacking. We're the good guys trying to break in to show you what your problems are, your vulnerabilities are, what your weaknesses are. But that, by definition, violated our charter. But there was ways to work around that, so I worked very closely. I was a business major in college, and so I sort of became the de facto business development person for our small team, and I was the one that was interested and willing to talk to the lawyers and try to help them to understand and talk to management and kind of build methodologies and an offering that was repeatable, whereas the other guys that I was working with, they just loved the technology aspect, but I was more business-minded, I guess. So we put together, I worked very long and hard and for an extended period of time with the legal counsel and with management, trying to put together an offering that then could be used outside of the classified realm. And when we got asked by a civil agency to basically, would you break into our systems or attempt to break into our systems to see how well we're doing? The answer is yes, we could do that, but it was a several months long process to go through all the bureaucratic,
all the red tape
political hoops
to
make that happen. We weren't supposed to be allowed to do it, but it was kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. The organization that was actually responsible at the time was a little organization called NIST.
NIST.
National Institute of Standards and Technology.
Okay.
Their purview was unclassified networks. But it was also, I learned, common knowledge that they had no capability. So they very often just sort of very quietly, when they were asked to do things, they would push it over to NSA. But again, it had to be done a particular way. So we followed that. I followed that path of going through all the hoops and following all the steps. And my particular customer, we were almost ready to start doing the work. We had all the paperwork signed, and there was NSA is run by a director, a military officer, general, admiral, depending on the branch of service. He had signed the letter back to the civil agency saying, yes, we'll do it, and your point of contact is me, Jeff Mann. Here's my contact information, all that. Before it could be delivered, this particular civil agency got hacked. Their website was defaced, which was the first, you can Google it and figure it out, it was the first hack against the government that had happened, at least publicly.
Right.
And
this is before you guys.
This is before we had a chance to do
Right.
our work.
Right.
Right before I came in on a Monday morning and got a call from the customer saying we were breached. We were hacked over the weekend. Our website was defaced. Can you help us? So what was meant to be an assessment of what we called a vulnerability and threat assessment. Try to break in, see what your weaknesses are, see if we could break in. Became which we had never done before. Nobody had really ever done it before. A forensics exercise and trying to figure out what went wrong, how the bad guy actually did it.
Yeah, you're following the fingerprints.
Well, if there were fingerprints, but there was no methodology, there were no rules, and they did all the classically bad things to try to get things back up and running and save face. So they demolished and obliterated any potential evidence, basically. Which, if the people that did it knew what they were doing, they would have already deleted it anyway. So it was somewhat moot. But I organized a team and went down to Washington, D.C. to this particular agency, and we spent a couple days there. And I got a call on a Thursday morning after we had already been there for an hour or two. I got a call from the home office that said, hey, the shit's hit the fan. You guys got to drop what you're doing and come back home now to Fort Meade. So we did, and got brought into the executive deputy director's conference room. Wood paneling, big huge desk, beautiful stuff, and proceeded to be read the Riot Act by the same lawyer that I'd been working with for months and months, trying to promote and facilitate all this stuff. And I learned that day, the first time I had ever heard of something called the church proceedings. And the church proceedings were a Senate investigation that was launched after Watergate. If you remember Watergate, the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, the Republican National Convention, or Republican National Committee, that was all Nixon, early 70s. But one of the outcomes of the church proceedings, and I'm grossly paraphrasing, there's volumes of reports.
Yeah, for sure, I get it.
But the church proceedings said, there's agencies like this, specifically CIA, FBI, and NSA, that have a lot of power, but pretty much no legislative oversight. So the outcome was what was called the NSA Charter, which, as I said earlier, NSA can't do what NSA does to U.S. citizens. And that's what I was being told we had violated, because we had rubbed somebody the wrong way, we had stepped on somebody's toes, there was something political bullshit going on that I was going to, because I was the team leader, I was very quickly made the scapegoat. And I was investigated, I was put on double secret probation. I found out years later from the lawyer, they were trying to arrest you. They wanted to prosecute you. I thought, no, this is just silly, because I was just trying to help out a customer, and I thought I'd done all the right things. I thought I'd jumped through all the hoops.
You thought you were GSDing, but boy,
yeah,
they were coming down your street.
Yeah, it's only GSD until somebody looks at it differently.
Yeah.
But the moral to the story is they absolved me officially. They couldn't find anything to stick, and so they said, well, you can come back and keep doing what you're doing. I'm like, well, I don't really want to. I'll just go out in the private sector because I don't have to go through weeks and months of bureaucracy and red tape. I could get hired by a company and do a project for a week or two, write a report, make a presentation, help them fix things, and move on. And what would take 6 months, within the government, within NSA, I could do in a couple weeks or a month. And that was a lot more appealing to me.
Right.
There wasn't the bureaucracy. There wasn't the red tape. There was just companies out there that we're plugging into the internet, and we know it's bad, but we don't know why or how it's bad. Can you show us? Can you teach us? So I set out because I had this information security background, this computer security, internet security background. Yes, there was a financial motivation. I got paid more in the private sector, but more so to that, it was job satisfaction. I went in and had customers that were responsive, and I could tell them what was wrong, and they could go off and think about fixing it. And it was done. It wasn't dragged out the way it was with the bureaucracy at NSA. Most of the people in this small group went out to the private sector, and we found out many years later, there was a book that came out in 2015 called Dark Territory by a guy named Kaplan. And in that book, they refer to the NSA Red Team operating out of a super secret chamber called the Pit that was so secret that nobody at NSA knew about it. And it was behind 2 combination locked doors, a little Hollywood theater there. But the guys that I worked with that were essentially we didn't call it a red team, but the first pen testers, ethical hackers at NSA, we nicknamed our office the Pit because we were trying to be nerdy and geeky and trying to live the hacker lifestyle. And somehow that got in folklore immortalized into we were the first red team and operated out of this super secret. It was a government office. If you've ever been to a government office, it's pretty boring. My family has been. They had one time they had a family day at NSA, and you got to bring your families into the office. All my kids and my wife have actually been in the Pit, which was just a government office. With olive drab walls, cubicles, and all that kind of stuff. But that was kind of, I didn't talk about that much. I went out into the private sector and just kind of bopped along, did my thing, trying to help companies, and enjoyed the success of working with companies that were much more responsive than government was. And there was a lot less red tape and a lot less bureaucracy and a lot less legal issues, at least early on.
When you see something like now today, like at a much lower level, like you see someone like on Facebook or something or social media, and they're like, "Oh, my account got hacked," and because they didn't change their password or something. Like, when you just scratch your head and, or what do you when you hear that? What do you do? Are you like,
so I've been doing this I've been doing the pen testing, ethical hacking, red teaming for 30 years now. I mean, it's been about 30 years since I got started learning how to break into computers and networks. The way we commonly exploited systems back then was one of 2 things: password related, guessing a password, stealing a password, cracking a password, or 2, exploiting a trust relationship. You trust the system that somebody's logging in from, you trust that they are who they say they are, you're trusting the level of access they have, something related to trust. In 2023, the first 2 ways, the primary ways that systems are breached or compromised or hacked today are still password related and trust relationships. So there's part of me that's very depressed, thinking we have not really made a whole lot of headway.
No progress.
Because we haven't solved the fundamental problems that have been plaguing us for 30 years. We've thrown a lot of technology at it. We've thrown a lot of capability. We've thrown a lot of automation, and now there's AI and all that kind of stuff.
What do you think of AI?
Let's come back to that.
That's another podcast.
That's just I don't think much of it at all. I'd rather not talk about it.
Okay.
But it's a little bit depressing at one level that we haven't solved the fundamental problems. But in not solving the fundamental problems, I think it's because we as a species, as humans, we don't want to have to think. We don't want to have to make hard decisions. We don't want to have to weigh the pros and cons. Just tell us what to do. Tell us what to buy. Tell us where to put it. Tell us what color the blinky light should be. And don't make us think about it, because security is so daunting and complicated. And it is, but it isn't.
Right.
And there's, at least in the private sector, there's also this factor of convenience and speed. I mean, think about the internet. What we have today compared to 30 years ago in terms of streaming video, and everything's connected, and all the information. I don't have to remember anything anymore. I just know how to Google. Or I can look up, if I'm trying to remember the name of an actor or actress, or what was that movie, or this or that. I've got the Internet Movie Database, imdb.com. So I know how to look stuff up. I don't have to remember. I don't remember my kids' names or birthdays, but it's out there somewhere. I can just Google it. The convenience, the speed, the level of access. It was a medium that was designed for information sharing, and then we decided to use it to capitalize economically. And oh, by the way, we should probably wrap some security around it, because we don't want everybody to have access to everything. So we've been sort of backfilling for 30 some odd years, trying to build security into something that wasn't designed to be secure in the first place.
Right.
In terms of data protection. And I was classically trained on all the deepest, darkest secrets are written down on paper and locked in a safe. You wouldn't think about digitizing it and putting it anywhere online. And yet we do that all the time routinely, because we love to have access to it. So there's this trade-off that I think we're ultimately losing from a security perspective, because we do like the convenience, we do like the access, and all the things that go with it vastly outweigh, to the point where most people don't even think about all the negative consequences. There's another element to it where I'd say, for all the gloom and doom and what in the industry we call FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, scare tactics to try to get people to buy this or buy that. It's mostly vendors, and mostly sales and marketing people. There's this element of the bad guys who are more than capable of doing many, many bad things, and nation state is. Nobody can protect themselves against the nation state. Critical infrastructure, it's going to fall. Everything's vulnerable. Everything's bad. The sky's falling. There's still an element of, if they're going to do something like that, it's still committing a crime. So there's got to be a willingness to commit a crime.
Right.
And they're doing their own risk equation or risk assessment of, do I want to take the chance of getting caught? Do I want to take the chance of doing this and committing this crime? And that's true at all levels. And in the nation state versus nation state game, and China's going after our infrastructure, and Russia's doing this and that and the other. I mean, we're almost getting back to the classic, at least the way I grew up, the Cold War, the game of cat and mouse,
right.
and most young people today don't remember what it was like to live in the Cold War, where we had tremendous victories and tremendous failures, and they kind of went back and forth. And,
right.
and each side won and each side lost, but nobody talked about it because it was the Cold War. We're sort of getting back to that. There's economic forces in play. Does China, who relies economically on the U.S. being a place where they sell their goods and services, do they really want to blow it up and lose that source of revenue, or do they want to protect it?
Huge revenue.
It's not as simple as let's take out the power grid and make the country go dark, because
right.
that's going to cost them as much money as it's going to cost us in the long run.
Right.
Doesn't mean somebody's not going to pull the trigger on that someday for whatever reason. There's a lot of capability out there, and I think part of the reason why it hasn't happened yet is because economically it doesn't make sense for it to happen. That doesn't mean there isn't some crazy that isn't going to go out and just do it just because, and there's always that threat. But it's still a crime, and people don't always commit crimes just because they can.
Have you ever been hacked?
Define hacked. Say we haven't talked about hacking. Hacking is verb or versus noun.
So have you been hacked where your a password's been taken or an account's been compromised?
So I have never had my password stolen from me, but I have certainly had passwords that have been stored at various other sites where they've been breached and my password has been compromised because it's been collected. But it's an indirect relationship.
Right.
My day job is I do work in what's called the payment card industry, PCI. So I work with organizations to protect the security of credit and debit card information, retailers, merchants, anybody that takes a credit card. My personal credit card, it's more my wife's card, not to throw her under the bus, but she uses her credit card to buy stuff at lots of smaller sites that don't really think about or pay for security. They don't necessarily
have the security.
So our credit cards have been compromised more times than I can count. It's usually once every 18 months or so. I've got a corporate card that I use for business travel, an American Express card, that I've had the same card, the same account number for probably close to 25 years, never been touched.
Yeah.
Part of that's because American Express was this is plastic, by the way.
Believe me, I know things are falling down.
I mean, American Express has been very good as a company at doing what's called fraud protection, fraud prevention. They look for weird uses or weird attempts at the cards. They were one of the early adopters as far as the major card brands and investing a lot in trying to prevent cards not from being stolen, but from being used to commit fraud.
Right. So besides public speaking and doing your day job with security for debit cards and credit cards, do you ever get reached out by the NSA to come back and do any projects?
I have never been approached by them, but I am in communication with people at different levels. I'm on a mailing list, member of a group that's called Information Assurance Alumni. When I was there, it was Information Security, but they rebranded the defensive side of the organization and called it Information Assurance for a while. There's a lot of us that talk about just preserving the history and all the stuff that we've done. I've worked with a lot of really, really, really smart people that have done really, really cool things. And, NSA, even when we were at NSA working on InfoSec, we were 10, 15% of the overall agency. Everything was focused on operations, the offense. So we were always kind of the bastard stepchild. We always had an inferiority complex. We didn't have the access to the resources and personnel and all that kind of stuff. But there was a lot, but it was still an important mission. So there's a movement to try to preserve a lot of that history. And so we're some subset of us are working with NSA has a National Cryptologic Museum, and they have programs trying to preserve the history. Like I'm in the process of trying to get the wheel donated. This is one of 2 prototypes that were made. I want to get them. I want one in the National Cryptologic Museum, and I want one to go to the Special Operations Museum at Fort Bragg. So I've got access from that. NSA has a booth. There's a big industry security conference every year called RSA out in San Francisco. And a couple of years ago, I went to the NSA booth, mostly because they always have an Enigma machine, so I have to go pay homage to the Enigma machine. But there's a young lady, I call her a young lady, I guess she's probably early 30s. She's a kid, as far as I'm concerned, but I met her at a booth 2 or 3 years ago, and she's like, "Oh, you're Jeff Mann." I'm like, and I assumed, oh yeah, she knows me, she knows my reputation, she knows what I've done. And she's like, "Oh, I went to school with your daughter." I'm like, wow. And she's like a senior level position at NSA right now.
Oh, that's great.
So, I saw her this past year at the RSA conference, and she was telling me again about they're trying to do programs where because they've lost so much institutional knowledge to people retiring and people going out into the private sector. They've had to go out into the private sector and try to bring stuff back in, but they're also starting a program where they're going out to people that have worked at NSA and left NSA and want to try to bring them in just for the mind meld, just for the knowledge share.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 40 years of, fascinating experiences, and I've done stupid stuff in the world of information security that my kids are tired of hearing about, but there's still useful nuggets there. There's still, history repeats itself and something to be learned from the history. And fundamentally, the principles of what originally was data security don't change. The technology has changed, the speed and the volume of data has changed, and the technology age has introduced new things to care about besides data that used to be written on paper and locked in a safe. But the fundamental principles largely have not changed on how to keep secrets and how to protect your sensitive data and how to do that in a repeatable, sustainable way.
If you had to do it all over again, what would you do different, or would you do anything different?
I would have gone left instead of going right long ago. Now, I mean, I did not grow up having any clue that this is what I would end up doing. I still am trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But I end up having had 40 years of experience and very unique experiences. And, I am told, and I guess I believe it, but I'd like to think I'm a little bit humble. But, the things that I did, like coming up with the wheel, I didn't think that was a big deal.
Right.
But it ended up being a big deal because the guys that used it really appreciated it, that it exists.
Absolutely.
It really helped their mission. And when I hear stories, I'm like, huh. And I did that the first 2 or 3 years on the job. What have I done since?
Right. So what's your message to the everyday GSTers out there that are listening to this show right now?
I would say to them, it's the same thing I've said to my children over the years, is you can go very far in life if you just simply pay attention. Keep your eyes open. Be aware of what's going on around you. I don't know who said it. There's a phrase that I learned many years ago that, like, if not you, who? If not now, when? If you see something, say something. You see that on the billboards.
Yeah, but it's a great saying, though.
It is a great saying. I mean, if you're seeing something, you're probably the only one seeing something.
Yeah.
You're the one that's going to do something about it. So,
GSD. I love it.
But it starts with paying attention. And there's so many people. I mean, one of the things I hate the most about technology, I go to airports all the time.
It makes people dumb.
I mean, nobody's interacting anymore. Nobody's talking anymore. Things that we learned as young people in terms of nonverbal communications, body posture, facial expressions. Are you sitting forward? Are you sitting back? I mean, I used to get lessons on how to go through job interviews, like
your arms
how to position yourself,
your arms crossed,
how to move the chair around,
absolutely.
all this stuff. And like, that's lost on this younger generation. Not to disparage the younger generation, but
oh no, not at all.
They're missing out on stuff, and I see it in my grandchildren all the time. It's like, wow, their brains are going to be jello because all they do is, Minecraft and watch YouTube videos.
And
they watch YouTube videos of other people playing video games, and I'm like,
that's real.
It's mind numbing.
So you've met my son then.
There's TV. There's TV shows. The reality shows.
There's no such thing.
Fake reality. But there's fake. They have shows of people watching the show, and you watch the people watch the show. This is fucking true, man. It's wild.
And this is why society is
fucking wild, man. Hey, listen, we've been at it almost an hour. I know you've got places to go and people to see. I will 100% say you're the only one that I officially know that's been on the show that worked for the NSA, but I feel like that's a very small part of your accomplishments that you've created and what you've done, especially for the special operations community, the special forces. When I heard about the Whiz Wheel, I didn't know. Obviously I've got a bunch of people that we're going to be doing here, so I was flipping through. So I'm honored that you're on the show, and I know there's going to be people that are listening to this show that are going to get some tidbits out there that are going to, learn. They're going to listen. They're going to pay attention, and I really hope that everyone that listens to the show can just pick up a couple little things that you said that say, you know what, I want to get shit done, and how can I do that? I can follow the guy who created these terms like red team and blue team before they were even really.
I didn't create the terms.
Well, okay.
I got them slapped on me.
Got them slapped on.
I did the stuff.
Yes, you did the stuff. But I do have a little gift for you, sir, because you are an everyday GSD person, and you have been doing that for many, many years. And I'm going to go back to the word hacker because we started with that. I had a different idea of what a hacker was. So I'm glad you were able to articulate that to me. But to sit across, I'm going to say this, and I hope this is not insulting, but an actual professional hacker, that it's an honor. It's fucking really cool to be. So I do have an Everyday GSD t-shirt for you.
Awesome.
Because you have been getting shit done for many, many years. Normally the taper's a little shorter, so we're going to wrap it up here, and we'll take some pictures, but here it is. Mr. Mann, thank you so much, sir. I appreciate you, appreciate your time, and I appreciate what you still do for the Special Forces community by you coming here from Maryland and being a guest speaker. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the Everyday GSD podcast. Episodes come out on the 1st and 15th of the month. If you want to watch people or listen to people that Everyday GSD, please download and subscribe wherever you listen or watch the Everyday GSD podcast. Everyday GSD.